sink that in there. Oops, need a little more water. Got submerged. I think we're boiling. Close to it anyway. Looks like there's some solid starting to precipitate. That means we're pretty close to saturated. Just add a little bit more solvent. Make sure that's completely dissolved. So I got lucky. 3 squirts was just about the right amount. From the looks of it. And that's completely dissolved. We're going to pour that into the small test tube. And let that cool. You can see there's a little bit of solid where the solvent's evaporating. And that was almost exactly 4 milliliters. So you see some crystals here where the solid residue is leaving a little bit of solid behind. Could also have used that for the mass spec sample. So I shouldn't need this again. Set that back. Now you can see it's already starting to crystallize. We're getting some cloudiness. That's good. Front, get a better view. So definitely some solid coming back. The ethanol anymore. I can put that back in the flame cabinet. We won't need any more of that either, as it turns out. May put that in a bottle labeled 50/50 ethanol water, so someone else needs it. There's a lot of solid forming in there. It's still warm. I'm going to let it cool to room temperature, and then I'll actually ice it. So I'm going to go grab another ice bath, and we'll make that ice bath in a 50 ml beaker so the test tube doesn't fall over. It's always a good idea when you're doing a recrystallization, once it's fully dissolved, to transfer it to the smallest vessel you can so that you minimize the amount of surface area that the solid is going to be lost on when you do the filtration. I was expecting to have to use a small Erlenmeyer flask, but with this volume a test tube is more logical. While we're waiting for that, since I'm going to want to be storing this in the desiccator overnight to dry before we get our spectra on it, I'm going to prepare a 10 milliliter beaker with a label. And weigh it so don't forget. So this is going to be DCL-10-49B. Tape that label on. And it has a mass of 8.13, well, now it's moving again. 8.135 grams, let's call it. 8.135 grams for the beaker without the solid. I want a clean spatula as well for transferring it. I don't want to contaminate it with that other solid. And since I'm going to be working with not very much solid, I'm going to use a small micro spatula. So you see there's quite a bit of solid in the bottom, all around the neck. And it's almost at room temperature. Oops, there goes my filter paper. Try to get this closer to the front so I can actually get at it. I'm going to wet that down with some of this cold solvent. Make sure we get a tight seal around the edges. Should be able to get away with icing that now. But there's a lot of solid coming out, so I don't really need to ice it carefully. Cool it for a little while. Meanwhile, the unknown alcohol is boiling away at 150 degrees. No, I'm going to call that good enough. So as you can see, it's kind of chunky. You know, the solid has trapped a lot of solvent with it. So I'm going to have to break that up before I can filter it. Kind of give it a stir. And we'll pour that out of there. It's really viscous. Probably could have used a little bit more solvent even. Rinse that with some cold solvent. Try to help it out. That's the disadvantage of the test tube. We've minimized the surface area, but we've also made it a little tricky to get the solid out. Swirled up. Got a little around the outside edges, so we'll use a little cold solvent to wash that off too. And that should have rinsed it nicely. We don't want to use too much solvent or we'll lose compound. Already lost some compound. You can see that there's some that's come through. So we'll just let air run through that for a little bit before we transfer that to a beaker. Kind of a nice powdery solid now. Hopefully not as sticky and wet as it was when it was crude. Always break the vacuum first, carefully. If you break it too fast, the air comes rushing in. Sometimes it pops the filter paper and the compound out right on the bench top. Now we can scrape that solid out. Still a little bit of a sticky solid. Definitely not as well behaved as the acetanilide was. I'll pull that out again later after it's dried. And hopefully that'll dry in the desiccator. Stuck inside a 50 ml beaker so it doesn't fall over. I'm going to let that evaporate so that we can get some more solid out of it if we need it, but hopefully that's enough for analysis. So that's the recrystallization done. That'll just sit in the desiccator over the weekend, and some mass spec will be run on Monday.